Abu Dhabi's real estate boom, year on year, was up 78%.
They've built alongside their infrastructure plans that they have. And what that's created is a more stable market.
I think we're in that phase before you start seeing it in headlines, before you start seeing the crowd arriving. It just hasn't built up the same level of hype in a good way. People are starting to focus on Abu Dhabi more. So today we want to talk about Abu Dhabi's real estate boom. I think to get into that, and before we start talking about the figures and what that's looking like today, it's probably useful to talk to people about our own journey, how we ended up getting involved in Abu Dhabi, why we're looking at it from such a focused perspective now. I think for anyone that's been working in the UAE space the last few years, obviously a lot of the headlines, a lot of the focus, what you hear about is Dubai for very obvious reasons, which we won't go into all of those reasons now. But it's obviously been a very attractive place for people to relocate to or to invest in property there, and lots of positive headlines. But I think one thing that we've noticed as a business over the last few months is that shift that is starting to take place where people are starting to focus on Abu Dhabi more. And I think we're in that phase before you start seeing it in headlines, before you start seeing the crowd arriving. We're in that point where if you're in the market and you are watching the figures closely, you can see what's happening. You're seeing that shift take place. So like first stat to sort of dig into towards the end of last year was looking at the sales volume. Year on year was up 78%. So that is obviously your first signal where there are more buyers coming into the market buying property. And as I say, I think if you're tuned into that, you see that. If you're not tuned into that, you don't really see that. So I do think there's a really big opportunity now where the shift has taken place, more people are looking at it. And obviously the purpose of this video now is to talk about why that is.
I think it's also important to know that 76% increase in sales transactions was against a backdrop of about 15% increase in Dubai. I actually just got back for a 5-week stint in the UAE myself, just this last weekend gone. And it's quite interesting. You can kind of see, the meetings I've had over the last 5 weeks, you can compare that to a year ago, and the amount of conversations I'm having now that aren't just Dubai focused. People are more tuned into what's happening in Abu Dhabi and also in RAK as well. And like you say, I think UK buyers make up such a big pool of interest in the UAE property market. And a lot of that initial demand was all Dubai, mainly because actually a lot of the education for people was around holidaying in Dubai. A lot of it was like leisure travel to Dubai, and that drove a lot of the education and the sort of like desire to maybe like want to real estate, invest into real estate there and lay down some roots there. As Dubai has matured as a market and more people have got more educated, they've also, Abu Dhabi is only an hour away. And I think a lot of people have started to sort of rotate and look at Abu Dhabi. If you've got larger portfolios in Dubai, well, where do you go now? Where do you diversify outside of Dubai if you've invested quite heavily? And I think Abu Dhabi is definitely one of those spots. Obviously, what I would say is I think Abu Dhabi is a very different market. I think it's a lot more end user driven. And I think we'll get into a lot of the points of the differences between Abu Dhabi and Dubai, because there are, even though they're an hour away to drive, they're being developed in very, very different ways that I don't think a lot of people really understand.
We're looking at this a lot of the time from an investment angle, buying property. What is the investment case for buying a property in any given area? But as we've seen more and more with the UAE, there tends to be other motives there. There are some people that are buying in the UAE and they are more interested in Abu Dhabi purely for financial reasons, but more often there is a lifestyle reason there as well. And I think probably one of the most common themes that we have seen from buyers, clients that we speak to is someone saying, based in the UK, might already own some property here, some investments in the UK. I want to invest in the UAE, but Dubai isn't quite right for me, for whatever reason. But they still want a piece of the UAE, and Abu Dhabi fits into what they're looking for in a better way than Dubai does. Dubai does lots of things very well. It's very exciting. We work in that market as well. But I think for buyers that are looking for something that's perhaps a little bit slower pace, a bit more low key, at a different stage of its cycle, that is where people start tuning into Abu Dhabi.
And it's quite interesting because Abu Dhabi's very intentionally developed at a lot slower rate than Dubai, where, Dubai is very sort of market led. If demand's there, they'll build it. Whereas in Abu Dhabi, it's more controlled by a couple of very large government backed developers, and it's a lot lower rise. It's more pedestrianised, is more greener. There's a lot more natural islands. They're a lot more selective in terms of what they're building. It's more quality over quantity. And because of that, they've not reacted to market conditions in the same way as Dubai. So they haven't just aggressively decided to build more because there's more demand. They've built alongside their infrastructure plans that they have. They're sort of more slow and steady with the release of projects. And what that's created is a more stable market. I think there's also some rental data that came out towards the end of last year about rental renewals being around 63% of tenants are renewing these tenancies and staying longer term in Abu Dhabi. I think it all goes back to that more owner-occupier focused market, which for investment is actually great.
If you're buying into a market that is super investor-led, if you're going into any development, whether that's anywhere around the world, you always want to see owner-occupiers buying property, crystallizing values and actually living there. I think that's always a big green tick. You see that a lot more probably in Abu Dhabi. I think you still got owner-occupiers in Dubai, of course, but Abu Dhabi is definitely weighted more towards end users, owner-occupiers. And I think that other point, talking about it's largely dominated by a few big players in Abu Dhabi. And what that really leads to is just cohesiveness throughout the builds, throughout the architecture, the infrastructure. Everything is planned in a way that all fits together. And I think anyone that knows Dubai knows some of the issues where Dubai perhaps got a little bit ahead of itself. Like you said, if there's demand there, they'll build it. And there's still loads of demand. They'll keep building. I think they're definitely now in tune with the problems that's created from an infrastructure perspective. You see it in Dubai traffic.
Yeah.
You look at Abu Dhabi, you don't have that problem at all. It's all built in a way that is filtering into the different communities, and the roads allow traffic to keep moving. Obviously, there's less people there as well that are passing through on a daily basis. But I think it is that cohesiveness that anyone, if you go to Abu Dhabi, the moment you drive through, you will notice the architecture of buildings and how it is all built very deliberately.
I think another thing as well is people are starting to tune into the wider UAE infrastructure that's going in, the Etihad Rail, for example, that's sort of connecting up the UAE in a way that's not really happened before. And I think that will bring a lot of people who are living in Dubai who maybe don't necessarily want the fast-paced lifestyle of Dubai. And like you kind of mentioned, they want to maybe live in Abu Dhabi where it's a slower pace of life. They can they can live in more pedestrianised areas, low-rise areas, closer to the beach, without the traffic or the busyness. And they can, the Etihad Rail, the fast lane that they're planning to do is going to be 30 minutes into Dubai. So even if they're working in downtown, that becomes really accessible as a place to live and still work in Dubai. I think we're starting to definitely see a lot more money started to get pointed towards Abu Dhabi. And obviously one of those reasons is because a lot of investors in Dubai have made a lot of money in Dubai. And I think Abu Dhabi being at an earlier stage of its cycle just is a natural investment play to make, as opposed to just doubling down, more and more into Dubai, where some of those chaps have already made a significant amount of money.
I think as well, probably one of the most common questions or objections that we get about UAE, which is largely focused on Dubai, is the market not oversaturated now? And people have concerns about the risk there. I think there's plenty of demand in Dubai and fundamentals, so I don't have that view. But I think with Abu Dhabi, that's not even in the picture. That's not a question at all. Is the market oversaturated? It just hasn't built up the same level of hype in a good way because it is all very, very controlled. The supply is very much managed. As we said, it's big government-backed developers who are controlling that supply in a way that you can't just have developers come in and pop up next to each other. So I think it kind of answers that concern that a lot of buyers or investors have in terms of going into a market that is just in an earlier stage in its cycle where you don't have the concerns about oversupply.
One thing that you do get fed back from people, and I've had it my own, our own experiences of being there, it is still a quiet place.
Yeah.
It is very different to Dubai in that sense. And you kind of get a feeling that they've built a lot of this world-class infrastructure and people are starting to move in, but it's happening at a sort of slower pace than what's happened in Dubai. It's still got a quietness to it. And we do get that feedback from people that, they spent time in Abu Dhabi and they felt it's quite quiet. But, at the same time, you've got, the entertainment district of Yas, which is just so impressive. You've got Disneyland coming in, you've got Warner Bros. That are already there, you've got SeaWorld there, you've got the F1 circuit, the marina, Ferrari World. You've got obviously the concerts that are going on, you've got the UFC fighting that happens there. Like, it's just one of the biggest hubs in the world for entertainment and things to do for kids and family. But at the same time, in the residential areas that have been built today, they're still very quiet. And obviously a lot of people love that.
So I think that is it. I think some people love that. Spoken to people and they go, when we were there and you go for breakfast and you go into a restaurant, there's not many people around. It's quite strange. You compare that to Dubai. But I think that's exactly what some people want.
Yeah.
Some people, they might still work in Dubai and actually choose to live in Abu Dhabi, or they might not have a requirement to travel somewhere into an office and they're working from home or whatever it is. And they want that quieter way of life. You feel it in Abu Dhabi, don't you, in terms of when you're driving along, and if you're in places like Saadiyat or Farhid and you're driving over natural islands, turquoise waters, you see the mangroves, the nature, like it is a very different feel. And I think that is exactly what people like about Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, my wife took me on the weekend. We were kayaking through the mangroves at Jebel Island, and we drove past all the equestrian centre that the Sheikh has, and it's a different world, and it's beautiful. And that is one of the big pluses of Abu Dhabi, is just the amount of natural islands they've got. And a natural island beach is just very different to anything, that's man-made. And obviously what's happening in the Saadiyat Cultural District, which, they're building iconic architectural buildings that, it's not like the Palm and the Burj and wow and big and loud. Their iconic buildings in Abu Dhabi are the Louvre Museum and the Zayed Museum, and these amazing architectural sculptural buildings that are being built in the cultural district. And it's just kind of this contrast that's kind of just like a thread through all of the differences between Abu Dhabi and Dubai. It seems very intentional.
Yeah, and the Guggenheim that's being built. Like these are proper world-class names that if people don't know about yet, they will get to know.
Yeah.
They will learn more about it. You even see celebrities now already promoting Yas Island. Millie Bobby Brown.
Yeah.
Promoting Yas Island and all of that. But that's all, I think, still to come. Like a lot of this stuff is in quite an early stage. Saadiyat, everything that's being built there. And it's being built with that demand in mind, I think, in terms of how the whole city works. And it just has that super premium feel. We try and draw references sometimes to the UK. And I think if you were to look at Saadiyat, I think we're in agreement that that's probably your Mayfair.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the best comparison. It's super premium. It's kind of the top postcode. You feel it as you walk around that everything feels premium. And then you now have that as kind of a cultural hub with stuff that's going in there, with everything we've spoken about, the Louvre, Guggenheim, the Zayed Museum. It's super premium. And I think that's exciting for investors as well, to be able to still be able to get a piece of something. If you try and get into Mayfair now and you look at where cost per square foot is in Mayfair, suddenly you'll start to think Saadiyat actually looks quite reasonable.
For sure.
And I think that's where that investment story starts to get quite exciting for where can this go over the next 5-10 years.
As a company that helps UK investors access the UAE market, and obviously we're traveling to the UAE all the time, we've obviously got our own plans working with Aldar and Modon and the largest government-backed developers in Abu Dhabi, and we're mapping out the exciting launches that we want to be part of and we want to help our clients with. And if that's of interest to anyone watching, obviously please do get in touch, and we can see how we can help.